We're very fortunate to have Professor Glen Martin with us. He's a professor of philosophy at Radford University in Virginia and has been, working for peace tirelessly for the last several decades, like Dr. S.L. Gandhi, from an American perspective. I think I first met Dr. Martin in the 1990s when he came to the Gandhi Foundation, where I was running a school of nonviolence. We've, been colleagues ever since. He's also, I'd like to say, President of International Philosophers for Peace and the Prevention of Nuclear Omnicide, which was set up by my colleague, Professor John Somerville. And this is an international network of philosophers trying to work for peace and to prevent nuclear war. So, he's also got that distinguished role. And finally, he's also president of the World Constitution and Parliament Association, which is working for world democracy. There's a very interesting constitution they've been developing since, I think, the 1960s about how we can stop the madness and chaos of the world through some kind of ordered system of federal democratic world government. Not a sort of scary thing that people can, grumble at, but a genuine we the peoples of the world type of coming together. So I think, he's a visionary and a peacemaker, and yes, may his pipe still have many smokes in it, is all I can say. Okay, Professor Martin, it's over to you. Thank you so much for being with us.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Tom. I appreciate your introduction and the opportunity to speak in the World Intellectual Forum, a very important forum for people thinking about the future and our planet. I've recently published a scholarly article called The Utopian Horizon, the Human Utopian Values, the Human Utopian Value Theory. And it includes a number of components. The first component is drawn from the work of Martin Heidegger in Being and Time, which came out in 1927, in which Heidegger does an existential phenomenology in which he tries to show that human beings exist as temporality, as a flow of time. And so if we look at our own consciousness, we see that there is a flow of time in us every moment, every day. Human beings, going all the way back to St. Augustine, human beings realize that we live in the present and only in the present, and past and future never exist for us. It's always the present moment. So past is memory. Past is something that we have no idea where or how or what it is, but we remember it historically, we remember it in terms of our personal lives and so on. And the future, likewise, is there as part of the present. And so the future is always with us. And in this dynamic present, we're always integrating our experience of the past and projecting it into a future. And that future has certain qualities about it. Heidegger emphasizes that it constitutes the present in many ways, that our present is oriented in this future direction, which means that a human being, the so-called essence of a human being is something that's in the process of becoming. It's in the process of actualizing a future, which is always moving, always toward that future, always constituted by the future. And this is very important, I think, because Heidegger distinguishes this understanding, this phenomenological understanding of what a human being is, from what he calls inauthentic clock time, right? That our ordinary uninformed way of existing in the world is to think that somehow there's a time that yesterday and today and tomorrow, and it's a clock time that's independent of the very constitution of our being, and that somehow we just live between birth and death within this framework of objectified clock time. And to think in this inauthentic way is to miss the dynamism of our human existential situation. Miss something very important, Heidegger says. So that's the first component that I want to lay out here as far as utopian horizon value theory is concerned. The second goes beyond Heidegger to people like Hans Jonas and an entire movement of thinkers and psychologists and spiritual leaders who see human growth as a transformational process, starting with a kind of immature egoism, moving as we grow through an ethnocentrism in which we assimilate and live in terms of our own culture, our own background, our own language, moving, if growth continues, moving toward a world-centric orientation in which we begin to think in terms of our common humanity, what Karl Marx called our species being, our common human collective civilization on this planet. And of course, many thinkers throughout history, going back to the ancient Stoics, understood human beings as brothers and sisters. In India, they say Vaisudhaiva Kutumbakam, all people are brothers and sisters. The world is one family. And so this is a stage, according to these thinkers, in human maturity. And but that's not the final stage. Almost exclusively, they say that we can go beyond a world-centric orientation to a cosmocentric orientation. We can become aware of the constitution of ourselves in relationship to the cosmos, the depths of the cosmos, the ground of being, if you will. And this has been articulated in many cultures in many different ways and is there in the world's religions, the sense of a cosmic awareness, the Sufi awareness, for example, or the Kabbalah in Judaism. And so a cosmic consciousness, these thinkers, these psychologists like Ken Wilber and such people who are elaborating this process of growth, this consciousness becomes transpersonal. It's no longer that it's I somehow intuit the universe, right? But the I that intuits the universe is the universe itself become conscious in myself. And so thinkers like Errol Harris and Sri Aurobindo in India, Teilhard de Chardin, articulate this transpersonal consciousness in this way. They say the universe has become conscious of itself in us, in me. This becomes very important because values then, values become objective and transpersonal. If there are values that show up in my life, I begin to be able to distinguish between my personal psychological characteristics. I prefer, this kind of ice cream, or I love flowers or something. I begin to be able to distinguish between that personal psychological dimension and a transpersonal dimension in me that I participate in, that is deeper and more fundamental, that comes from the universe, the cosmos itself. So people like Abraham Maslow, for example, the great psychologist, talks about human needs, and beginning with physiological needs and moving through belonging needs and esteem needs. He says that in his studies, exclusively people who have satisfied these lower levels of needs then move to a level of self-actualization. And this self-actualization is transpersonal, he says. And out of it comes an astonishing similarity of the kind of values that people identify at the transpersonal level. Beauty, truth, these are now objective qualities. Justice, the need for interpersonal love, the need for self-completion, wholeness, perfection. These are transpersonal values at the highest levels of human self-actualization. So in this work that I'm developing on utopian horizon value theory, I point to the identification that Immanuel Kant made in his revolutionary work, The Critique of Pure Reason, that says, that discerns that human consciousness itself, what he calls the transcendental unity of apperception, the transcendental ego, is later identified as. This transcendental ego, Kant realized that we could not conceive, as we do, of a universe as a whole. Our experience, our empirical experience, is disparate. This object, that object, this world, this, but implicit in that is that all these objects are part of a whole universe. And Kant said that argued that the wholeness of this universe is parallel to the unity of consciousness, this transpersonal unity of consciousness, which synthesizes its experience as the experience of a unity of a universe. The consciousness and the universe are now correlated here. And it becomes very important to realize that this is not the psychological ego. This is not my personal ups and downs, my feelings, my thoughts, and so on. This unity of consciousness transcends that. It makes possible my personal dimension, but it is not identical at all with my personal dimension. And people who have not entered the transpersonal level often use the word I, right? I, and they use it in this uncritical way, as if the unity of consciousness were somehow the personal subjective I, which it is not. So here we have a kind of model. Later, Wittgenstein points out something parallel to this model, and that is that the I cannot see itself, right? The visual field that we experience, we look around us, we see all these things, but the I is the human eye is the presupposition of a visual field, and it, in principle, cannot appear as part of that field. And it's identical, Wittgenstein says, with human consciousness. And in this case, also Kant's transcendental ego. It's identical in the sense that the entire world that we experience, that we're conscious of, presupposes a transcendental consciousness, which itself cannot be part of the world that we experience. It is the presupposition. It makes possible that world. And this, again, resonates with the cosmic dimension that people talk about when they reach the cosmic levels of consciousness. There's something in this unity of consciousness that is has this extraordinary feature about it. So here we have a situation in which human beings live in a perpetual present moment. And mystics of all ages, of all dimensions, of all cultures have said that this present is beyond time. It can be experienced as beyond time. There's a deep reality to this that they have identified as eternity. The present moment is not in time at all, as Wittgenstein put it. But nevertheless, this present, this unity of consciousness that exists in a present is temporalized, as we've seen. It is a unity that experiences the world in terms of past, present, and future of before. So there's a flow. The eternal present is also integrated inseparably with a flow between past and present and future. And my thesis in Utopian Horizon Value Theory, drawing on all the things that I've just mentioned in terms of the values that arise from transpersonal self-actualization and so on, my thesis is that the structure of that temporal consciousness, which always in the present is looking for a better future. We're always evaluating the past as lacking, as something going wrong with it, as including war or violence or incoherence. And we're always thinking in the present, how can it be better? There's a better future. And this better future doesn't have a limit on it. It can be immeasurably better. It can be perfection, right? As Jesus says in the book of Matthew, you know, you should be perfect as your Father in heaven is perfect. So we have this goal, this criterion of perfection at the horizon of our futurity. The future is there perpetually moving beyond the present, and the future speaks for perfection, for goodness, for truth, for justice, for these transpersonal ideal values. So the important thing to realize, I think, here is that in our ordinary consciousness, in which we think of ourselves as just little subjective individuals within a clock time that moves between past and future, that what Heidegger calls inauthentic, we think of these utopian ideas as merely subjective, and we reject them. We say it's not realistic. It's not what we should be. It's not what we are. It's just my fantasies. I think things should be better. But that's not the case at all. In our human situation, we exist as this transpersonal, transcendental ego, and that ego is constituted by a flow in which perfection and utopia are part of the very structure of consciousness. Objective values that flow from the objective consciousness that we are as the universe become conscious of itself in us. Right? We are that universe, and that universe has projected in us a process, a temporal process that is transformative. That is what Hans Jonas calls freedom, right? Freedom has emerged out of the process. And we as freedom, therefore, our tasks are called to pay attention to that utopian horizon and work in terms of our present world and our present consciousness and so on, to transform that world to one of justice and peace and all the values that derive from a utopian vision. In other words, utopia is a demand, an objective demand on our lives, It's not merely a subjective fantasy. And that's why, as Tom said in his introduction, that's why I work to help people ratify and understand the meaning of the Constitution for the Federation of Earth. We need to join human beings and transcend this chaos of violence and war and hatred and fear that now constitutes our world. And this is not just some utopian idea that has no grounding in realism, right? What is realistic is to realize our nature as human beings, right? As a transcendental unity of apperception that includes the utopian as part of the very structure of consciousness. So that's my main thesis in that I'd like to try to just get across in this brief few minutes to you today. And it's there in this 10,000 word paper that I wrote, but I also, on academia.edu, I also have put this in a 4-page paper, shorter paper that's called The Utopian Horizon of Objective Human Values. So if you're interested, you could look at that as well.
Well, thank you so much, Glenn. That was very, interesting talk, and I'm sure our observers will be fascinated by this notion you brought in. I mean, to use my language, I'd say what you're talking about is a reconciliation of eschatologies. You see, every religion, every thinker, every political system has a sort of vision of the future, and this is what is called an eschatology. It means their vision of the last things, where we're going. All the religions have a variant of that, and I mean, a lot of what you said is so parallel to what I'm doing. It's almost uncanny because because I've spent 20, 30 years on wondering how we can reconcile the eschatologies. On the one hand, we had the Marxist view that the way to do it is to do it materially, give everyone an apartment, a job, and free education, and the rest will come later. And if you don't like that model, then we'll shoot you. I mean, the problem is, how do we deal with the clashes of eschatologies? So, for instance, let's take Israel-Palestine. We have the Hebrew nation has returned after the Holocaust in wounds, traumas, tragedy, to build a new, beautiful nation. They have an eschatological vision based on apocalyptic theory and Judaism. Zionism is implicit in the idea of, they're not just doing this for themselves, they're doing this for all humanity. They're going to redeem the world, tikkun. And then you've got the local Palestinians who are either Christian or Muslim who don't agree with that eschatology. They have a different cosmology, a different utopian horizon. For them, Christ is very important. Half of them think he's actually the Son of God. Half think he's just a great prophet like Muhammad. Right. How do we reconcile these conflicts which have these eschatological bases? That's what I've been struggling with. And that led me to write a sequel to Heidegger's book. I'm not sure if you know this. This is the other weird thing about synchronicity here. I spent 7 years writing a sequel to Heidegger called Being and Knowledge. I came to the view that I love what Heidegger did in Being and Time. I also love what Sartre did in Being and Nothingness. But after musing about this, and I was teaching philosophy at high level like you, and I thought, well, what we need is the third, the trilogy, the sequel. Because the real dialectical problem we're facing as humanity is the tension between beingness and knowledge. We are, after all, Homo sapiens. We're all trying to know stuff. You're trying to know about utopian horizons. I'm trying to know about conflicts of eschatologies and how to solve them. So I dedicated 6 years of my life, and it's still not finished, to like, how do we resolve that? The conflict or tension or harmony between being and knowledge. And what are the different views of knowledge in different cultures and religions? What epistemological, windows do they provide? So I mean, I'm still working on the answers like you. And I would love to say, yes, the answer is that we adopt a world government scheme, that we all, endorse and support the world constitution. I think of all the models around, it's the ones I've looked at, it certainly seems the most robust. But on the other hand, then we have other groups coming along and saying, no, we're the best world government. Our scheme is best, our constitution. So we have this human tendency to conflict, even with the utopian horizon of potential world government schemes that are democratic and just. We'll even make conflict and diversity there. It's weird, this thing about human nature. So how do we, anyway, that's my question, is how do we reconcile these conflicting utopian eschatologies and stop conflicts?
That's perhaps the ultimate question and the most difficult question, and not easily answered. I think one thing, though, to consider, in your example of the Israelis and the Palestinians and so on, or the eschatologies of, the Muslims and the Christians, or the Hindus or the Buddhists, is that there, as we know, there's this movement that has perhaps been there throughout history, but is especially problematic today in the 20th and 21st centuries, of fundamentalism, in the sense that people are taking their eschatological scriptures or their cultural traditions literally, right? And in my 2005 book Millennium Dawn, I have an entire chapter, chapter 4, on what I call the Copernican revolution in religion, and so that in which that we're moving in the modern age to an understanding of the difficulties of translation, the difficulty, but we're also moving to a level in which we see that that all of these eschatologies and these visions are symbolic in a very real way. They're not to be taken literally, right? And if you say that literally God has promised this portion of the world to the Zionists, right, it is divisive, right? If you start saying literally that no one comes to God except through me, Jesus as the Christ, and you take that literally, then you're excluding the Muslims and the Buddhists and so on. The intellectual movement, I would say, of the world is moving beyond that, is beginning to see that there is a coherence and a confluence of all these eschatologies that we need to, scholars like ourselves need to articulate in what ways they resonate with one another, in what ways mistaken particularistic identifications are divisive of the unity that we're seeking. I would say something like that would be a way to address this problem of eschatologies, this problem of the utopian horizon and values. Right? And as far as the Earth Constitution is concerned, Tom, I don't think anyone of the leaders that I've been associated with who have worked on this, since 1968 and so on, none of them think that it is the kind of magic bullet or has all the answers. There are things I would change in the Earth Constitution. It is not, there's no such thing as a perfect document that everybody's going to agree on, but it is a tool, in my view, in my understanding, it is the most efficient and valuable tool that human beings have right now to move to a level of unity in which we can then really begin to discuss this problem of unity and diversity, right? Unless we move to a higher level of existence on this planet, getting rid of this sovereign autonomy of 193 militarized units that can't agree because they all are spying on one another and suspicious of one another. Unless we can move to a unity of human civilization, we won't even begin to solve these difficult problems of unity and diversity. So we've got to use, in my view, this is a tool for the next step that will make possible further development of our human consciousness and our actualization of what we need to be as human beings on the earth.
Well, thank you so much. That's a very good, food for thought there, because on the first point, I agree 100%. Scholarship has solved this problem of rival eschatologies. The trouble is the middle management of the religions haven't got it.
That's right.
They're still fed the notion that literalism is the only way forward, and their jobs are at stake. Because if the pastor in your local church in Radford, Virginia gets up and says, well, actually this thing about Christ saying he's the only way, don't take that literally, he'll be out of a job next week, because some old ladies at the back of the pews will complain to the bishop.
Yeah.
And it's the same in Islam. If somebody said, well, actually this thing about Muhammad being the last prophet, it's not actually in the Quran. He might not well be the last prophet. Maybe he was just the one at the time.
Yeah.
So yes, of course, scholars like us have to satisfy the job security of the religions and the middle management and the lower management. And actually, we have to reformulate their job descriptions so that actually what they should be is what Neil Oram and Anais Nin called spies for love or spies for God, instead of being spies for their own little military cliques. A true servant of Allah or a true servant of Yahweh or Brahma is a spy for the universal, which is the absolute that you pointed out so eloquently, coming from your Kantian transcendental perspective. So yes, of course, that's our job, and that's where I see the World Intellectual Forum as having a role. That's why conversations like this are so valuable. We can broadcast them, people can listen. They can think, well, actually, I can be a good Muslim, and yet I can still believe in universalism.
Yeah.
That's why I've also spent 5 years doing a commentary on the Quran, a line-by-line commentary in English, chronologically. So, and it fits in with your utopian horizon idea. I argued as a scholar that to understand the Quran, we have to look at it in historical perspective. Muhammad got these revelations in sequence.
Yeah.
And there must be a reason for that. And it will be in his own transpersonal unfolding, his own prophetic career, if you want. He was having a personal existential engagement with the absolute, which was very scary for him at first. He thought he was going bonkers.
Yeah.
But it's fascinating to watch. So I've done a kind of transpersonal psychologist history of the unfolding of the Quran, trying to explain what is hiding behind these revelatory verses.
My goodness.
And it's still not complete, but I've finished 98% of this. Now, this commentary could be read by every single Muslim on the planet or non-Muslim, and it explains what that whole thing is about. And it would explain to the average Muslim why they can be a universalist and yet say that, yes, they believe everything in the Quran, because it's about hermeneutics. If you have, and everything I've done in my commentary is in line with orthodox Islamic philosophy and at the highest levels, because the greatest Islamic scholars all said this. They said through the Quran peeps the mind of God. Don't get hung up on the words, dive into the depths, and the Sufi poets like Rumi explained all that, Ibn Arabi and so on.
Right.
But I've also done the same with a commentary on the New Testament. You see, my project, I'm doing I'm doing the sort of coal-face work, going through each of the religions. I've done the same with a commentary on the 4 Gospels.
My goodness.
Some of the letters of Paul, and also the Gnostic Gospels of Thomas and Mary Magdalene.
Mm-hmm.
And I've done a thing, explaining how the universalist spirit speaks through the particularities of these little vignettes of Christ's story and his teachings,
Mm-hmm.
So that's some of the work I've been doing, which fits in exactly with what you're doing. I
Yeah,
think
interesting. Yeah, wonderful.
it's providing job security to all these different thinkers. I've also been doing the same with the Psalms of David to try and explain in the Jewish biblical context how the absolute and the relative can be reconciled.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Going back to the thing about the Constitution, again, I think there's a role here possibly for the World Intellectual Forum that might be really valuable, because we have several World Constitution plans and programs. As I say, I'm sure I think yours is the most robust, it's the most time-tested. We have a proposal by Dr. Swaminathan, our chair, but that's sort of, he's done his best, he's thought it through. And then we have Igor Kondrashin, Nicholas Hagar, and their Universal State of the Earth project.
Right.
Again, that has its own history and lineage and so on. And there are other programs. How about this for an idea? Couldn't the World Constitution and the other groups come together in what we could call a World Constitutional Convention? And that's the way forward, surely, because, for instance, when Scotland wanted to leave the UK, they called the Constitutional Convention, and that process is now underway. Scotland is disengaging from the military project called the United Kingdom, which is, a sort of military project for nuclear weapons development, and the Scots don't want to be part of it. When the French decided to get rid of their monarchy, they had a constitutional convention. I think you did the same in the States. You called it the Congress, or that's where Congress came from, was the Constitutional Convention. So maybe we need, for the planet now, at this critical time in history, we need to call a World Constitutional Convention, and your constitution should be discussed, the other ones can be discussed, and we can come up with the best synthesis. We can keep all the best ideas of all of them. We can debate it in a democratic, rational way. The World Intellectual Forum can co-convene this with your group and others. I mean, how's about that for a way forward? Is that possible?
It's a possibility. There's a certain version of that being promoted by the Democratic World Federalists, right? The president of that organization is Dr. Roger Cotilla, in which they're working to get the United Nations to do an Article 109 review conference. And at that review conference, they will be introducing the Constitution for the Federation of Earth to the, and probably the review conference would not just accept it verbatim, but might just act as a kind of constituent assembly or constitutional convention, the way you're talking about, right? So that's one avenue of possibility. But the things like suggestions like you've just made, of course, have been made by other groups and other people going back to throughout the history of world federalism, right? Going back to even before World War II. The Montreux Conference in 1947 called for world government and just this kind of group coming together and working on a constitution. And the problem there is that it wouldn't just be the highly thoughtful and well-informed people from the World Intellectual Forum. The multinational corporations, the imperial directors of the United States and Russia and China, the big powers that do not want the world to change, they would be in there as well, right? You couldn't very well exclude
Well,
them.
hang on, who's invited them?
Yeah, well, if you don't invite them, nothing's going to happen, you know. And this is, you know, what the thing I'm saying is that people have been debating on what is the best constitution for the longest time, and no one ever agrees, right? So my point is the following: the constitution that we have, that you call robust, part of its robustness is that it is open to amendment very easily. And it even calls, in Article 18, it calls for a constituent assembly, a review of the entire Constitution within 10 years of the first operative stage of the world government. So my argument is that we really don't have time to keep discussing, like we've been doing since before World War II, how we're going to come together as human beings. We have a tool, an effective tool, which can begin the process, bring us together, and then if it needs modification and changes, and I would be the first to say, yes, this or that might be changed, then it's the time to change it, because then we will have the initial unity and we will have a recognized democratic methodology for making those changes. So the changes are legitimate, in other words. So because you have to follow the democratic procedures in the Constitution. Whereas if we had another constituent assembly or constitutional convention, the group of very wise people might come together and write a better constitution, but then they'd present it to the world and you'd have the same problem all over again. The world, there'll be more people who say, well, we need to change this or that. And the multinational corporations and the big powers would be in there saying, you're trying to overthrow the present order of things. It's just going to go on forever and ever, and so I'm saying that this tool has got to be used now as a means for getting past this impasse. We're at an impasse, right? We're discussing what is going to be the best, how we can bring all these insights together, and we'll be doing that forever unless we can transcend this giant, world-threatening collapse of the planetary environment and possibility of nuclear war that we're living under the darkness of, and we don't have that much time, right? We don't have a future where we can discuss for the next 80 years what is our best option, right? The scientists are telling us right now that unless the world changes radically in the next 10 years in terms of carbon emissions and so on, climate change may be unstoppable. And the earth may be so hot by the end of the century that it will be almost unlivable for higher forms of life and so on. So that's my perspective, is that we have a tool, we can use this tool. It's not the final, it's not going to bind us, because it is a living tool that can help us keep changing and keep modifying and keep improving the tool into the future.
Well, thank you so much. That's a very, excellent reply. And I mean, okay, so let me just be practical here. Let me say that the listeners who are listening to this say, gosh, they sit up and they say, well, I want to support this project. I mean, it goes back to Philip Isley in the 1960s. I met Philip, and, it comes with its own lineage, which is, it ages with like a good bottle of Scottish whiskey, So let's say we're at a turning point on the planet. Let's say my Scottish friends, Scottish intellectuals, and I've set up a thing called Intellectuals for Free Scotland. They're very clever people. They're sick of being part of the UK. Let's say they want to jump to being part of a world government federation democracy, a proper thing. I think they all thought the British Commonwealth was supposed to be that, but now they've realized actually it's just a They call it West Monster with its nuclear weapons and its arrogance towards people of other,
yeah.
cultures. So how can they get involved practically? What's the next step? So can you online ratify this constitution?
Sure. Or
Yeah.
the www.earthconstitution.world is our website.
Right.
Earthconstitution.world.
Okay.
And it can be ratified there, and people can find out more about it there. There's a lot of literature there. The Constitution itself is there, and
So what happens? Let me just jump forward here. So it's the same here in France. There's a lot of world-minded citizens. We call it in
yeah,
France mondialism.
yeah,
People that think in a globalist perspective. And
right,
we have many French citizens who've been dreaming of this since, the 18th century. It was part of Rousseau's vision. It was part of Voltaire. The Enlightenment in France was very much about building a world society. They always saw the French Revolution following on the American as just the first step towards a global humanity. So if I go and tell my friends in Paris, there's this wonderful world constitution, so they ratify it online. And what do? Can we create a French chapter or a Scottish
oh,
chapter?
sure. We have chapters in various countries around the world, right? And we have all kinds of ways that people can get involved. We have all kinds of projects, right? The World Electoral District Project, for example. The Constitution calls for 1,000 world electoral districts,
Okay.
roughly equal by population.
And have you got a map of them? I mean, is France in one of them?
We're developing a map of them in conjunction with local chapters, and we have a project now, Tom, in which we are working with people who know how to give secure online identities, right? You can do that with blockchain technology and so on. And so we are developing secure online identities for world citizens who will be able to vote securely within these world electoral districts and begin electing a virtual world parliament. This is our next step that we're talking about. And
if a bunch of my friends from Scotland, France, Britain ratify it, and then they can get this world citizenship ID, and then they can be part of the voting system.
That's right. That's right. And also, our next session of the Provisional World Parliament is scheduled for New Delhi in December. And of course, if COVID doesn't allow it, we'll postpone it for 6 months or whatever. But right now, we're working to have the 15th session of the Provisional World Parliament under Article 19 of the Earth Constitution. One of the wonderful things about this Constitution is that Article 19 says we need to start it now. We can do it now. We don't have to wait till the nations come around to ratify it or whatever. And so we have all these projects that people can get involved with if they're interested. And one of the things I wanted to mention about when you mentioned Scotland, your friends in Scotland who think they should be independent, the Constitution calls for a House of Nations, right? And every nation will have representatives in the House of Nations, but it never defines what a nation is. And this is a very wise thing, a very intentional thing, because there need be no limits on nations according to the arbitrary boundaries that now exist. We could have a Kurdish nation under the Constitution. We could have a Scottish nation. We could have a Uighur nation, and so on, a Rohingya nation. All these marginalized groups now that feel like they need somehow to be free and sovereign. Sovereignty isn't the problem. The problem is unity and diversity. How do we recognize this diversity with a real unity that allows us all to participate democratically in governing our planet? And so, the Constitution is not going to say, oh, the United Kingdom is one nation and it has to include Scotland or Ireland or whatever. That's not it at all. Because the sovereignty, once sovereignty is lifted, this burden that I have to be independent with my military and everything. Once this is burden lifted from people, and they see that the people of Earth are sovereign, and that unity in diversity is what really will protect our diversities. Our cultural and religious and all the other diversities are protected once we have a really effective and meaningful unity. We're all human beings, we're all equal, we're all world citizens, we're all participating and governing ourselves on this planet. Right? So that's part of the vision there behind the Earth Constitution.
Well, that's very good news. I will spread that to my Scottish friends and Wales. The Catalonian people also, there's this problem, you know, they want to be a nation, but they're part of Spain. So that's really important. And the Kurds and so on. And the Palestinians, you know, non-recognized peoples that feel to be nations, but their local neighbors aren't giving them recognition. It's a problem all over the planet. And you mentioned the Rohingyas in Myanmar and so on. It's and the Uyghurs in China. So, you know, that's another very good reason to really get behind this project you're doing. I think it's important. And I hope maybe in the Delhi conference, you could invite, you know, people like Swaminathan and Igor Kondrashin to come and see how it works in operation.
Absolutely.
Let's not exclude them and get them involved, you know. So look, we're coming to the end of our time, but let me just ask one final question, going back to philosophy. Your talk was, I think, brilliant about the utopian horizon and the values that come. I'm a great fan of Sir Thomas More, who coined the word utopia, who's a saint of politics in the Christian tradition. Today in the saints, we celebrate a saint called Saint Benjamin, who was in Persia, in fact, martyred by some Persian Zoroastrian, you know, monarch. Again, it was a clash of eschatologies. Couldn't accept his Christian thing, because I think the thing about Christ was he was really annoying to everyone because he was insisting the kingdom of God has come now, which is, you know, kind of what your constitutional group is saying. It's, we can do this, we can do it now. Now that's really annoying to people that want to postpone it always, especially the people in power, because we have to be realistic. You know, as you say, the military, the intelligence, the nuclear armed states, they don't want utopia. They don't want anything to change. They're sitting on their power pyramids as the monarchs of the, you know, the empires of evil. And, you know, they will not want this. So that's really annoying to be told, no, it's now, it's happening. Kingdom of God's now. And so what they did with Benjamin was lock him up in a prison and torture him, usual old stuff, right? So and they did that to Thomas More, you know, poor old man, utopian, and he was inspired to write that book by what he'd heard of Sri Lanka, a Buddhist country. I've researched it. He'd spent time in Antwerp. He was an ambassador from Britain to the Low Countries, and he met people who'd been to Sri Lanka. They told him about the island, and that's his utopia, you know. And yet he ended up in the tower and being tortured and executed because the powers that be, the state under Henry, didn't want utopia now, didn't want Christianity, actually. It wanted its own watered down, filtered out Anglicanism, which was getting rid of all the saints and getting rid of all the, you know, the Jesuits and all the threatening kind of people that were insisting, no, Christ is a serious power. So, and yet the spark hasn't gone. The utopian tradition lives on. And Ernst Bloch, who wrote about the eschatology of hope, a great philosopher from the more left Marxist tradition, his work on hope is really, really important here.
Right.
But I just want to ask a final question, which is, what is the role of love in all this? You talk about bridging unity and diversity. And is not love something, is it? I mean, I've read Viktor Frankl's wonderful book. He describes living in the concentration camp. It was the thought of his wife. It was the love he had for life that kept him going. He had to walk out in the mornings on the work groups from the camp. They had no shoes. It was snowing. You know, normal people would have given up and died. But he had this deep love. And that love is an orientation towards the future, isn't it? It's because we love
Yes.
somebody that we care about
Yes.
them, we want to see them again, and we
Yes.
dream a future together. So where does, I mean, we're World Intellectual Forum, but we also, love has a role to play, doesn't it, in this
Sure.
future we're
Absolutely.
building?
Right.
What,
I have a whole, in my 2018 book called Global Democracy and Human Self-Transcendence, I have an entire chapter on love. And it is, it looks at the different forms of love, philia, agape, eros, and so on. But it also looks at those philosophers and those thinkers and those visionaries who have seen that love as this cosmic dimension, right? That we can't. It isn't just a matter of the cosmic being transpersonal, but love itself is transpersonal. Agape, unconditional, right? It's not personal, and this Errol Harris, who articulated this as a philosopher, talks about rational love. And in my own writings about the Earth Constitution, I have repeatedly asserted that democratic world law is the 21st century form of love. Love can be embodied in our institutions. It can be embodied in the way we articulate our relationship with one another in democracy and so on. In fact, it's probably not that it can be embodied so, but it needs to be. It's fundamental. It cannot be removed. And in the unity and diversity that is created by the Constitution, that unity is not just a political unity in the sense that we're all world citizens under a world parliament, but it has to be the unity of a love of a human caring, fundamental caring for one another and for our flourishing. If there's unity and diversity, the diversity comes because from the point of view of the unity, which is a part of a dimension of love, from the point of view of the unity, we want diversity to flourish. We want that Buddhist to live as a beautiful Buddhist and that Muslim as a beautiful Muslim and so on. They're not incompatible with one another if love is the framework. And I think the Constitution, I've argued in my writings very often that the Constitution is an embodiment of love. It's a concretization of love. Law can be love. And I just gave a lecture a couple of days ago to a university called KIT University in India, which works with a philosopher named Peter Gabel and another and several other philosophers coming from the Sri Aurobindo tradition that are investigating spirituality in law, right? How is spirituality, what fundamental dimension of spirituality is love, how can that be integrated into our concept of law and our realization that we need law? We need to be on the same page, and we need rules by which we can have conversations with one another and make decisions with one another without violence and reducing violence and so on. All that is a function of love, I think.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, well, thank you so much for those thoughts on love. You're certainly a very well-rounded thinker, and I think you deserve the titles you hold, and you're custodian for this the hope of the future, this utopian vision. So I hope that everybody that's listening will ratify your constitution, get involved, and join the World Intellectual Forum if you're drawn to thinking and ideas. And also, don't forget, if you're a philosopher and want to get involved with peace work, join our Philosophers for Peace group. Glenn is president. I'm one of the vice presidents, and we have others in other countries. So, we need to think through the details of peace philosophically. That's our duty as lovers of wisdom I've just been working on the life of Pythagoras and Orpheus and Plato for a book on religious mathematics that I'm enjoying doing. So, you know, I've revisited the well springs of classical philosophy. It's so important, this vision of the love of wisdom. Going back to the Orphic mysteries, actually, being prepared to go into the underworld to rescue what is good, the Eurydice, which to me stands for the soul, if you want, of humanity, out of the nightmares of the, you know, the paranoid Plutus types that have captured her, the military. So anyway, it's one work we're doing, and thank you so much for sharing. I hope you'll come again to the World Intellectual Forum, and we'll have to try and juggle the time differences so that we can meet at a time when you're available.
Very good. Yeah.
But thank you so much, Glenn, for your words of wisdom.
Okay, thank you, Tom.
Okay, look, Kanu, let's go with your talk next, because your signal is pretty clear, I think.
Sure, Dr. Thomas.
So we'll go with you next. Yeah.
Yeah. So firstly, I would like to thank Professor Thomas for providing me once again the opportunity to present on World Intellectual Forum. And today I'll be speaking on neuroscience of peace and conflict. So I'll start sharing my screen. Yeah, Professor Thomas, you need to enable the screen sharing.
Yeah.
Yes, I will start now. Yes.
Should be working now.
Okay. So I hope the screen is visible now.
Yeah.
Yes. Is it visible?
Yes, we can see that.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, today I'll be speaking on neuroscience of conflict and peace. Okay. So before I go into the neuroscience of conflict and peace, first I would like to brief about the nervous system, which is the different parts of the brain and other associated organs. So basically the nervous system is divided into two main divisions. The first one is the central nervous system, and the second one is the peripheral nervous system. So as we can see here, the central nervous system mainly includes brain and the spinal cord, whereas the peripheral nervous system includes all the network of the nerves which connects brain to different parts of the body. So here we can see that brain is connected to different parts of the body, muscles, organs, and other parts by means of the peripheral nerves. Now this, when we go about the central nervous system, when we talk about the central nervous system, it mainly includes brain and spinal cord. So the brain basically divided into different important regions like your forebrain, midbrain, and hindbrain. The forebrain is the foremost part of the brain, which is at the front. The midbrain connects the forebrain with the hindbrain. Hindbrain is the last part of the brain which connects with the brainstem. So, and which continues to the spinal cord. So basically the cerebrum, which is the frontalmost part of the brain, it is the most developed part of the brain and is considered as the CEO of the brain. So this is the chief regulator of your judgmental and thinking abilities. Now cerebral cortex, as I have just now discussed, it is the outermost portion. This is the outermost portion of cerebrum. So the uppermost part of the cerebrum is known as the cortex. Now in this cortex area, there is an area which is known as prefrontal cortex, which is exactly behind the forehead. So the prefrontal cortex, which is the chief, very important part of the cortex, is that particular area regulates the thinking of the brain, where the logic and judgment resides, right? So this prefrontal cortex mainly is known as the strategy center of the brain because it controls the logic and judgment. Now, on the other hand, there is one more part of the brain which controls the emotions, that is known as limbic system. Now this limbic system is also called as the emotional center of the brain because this is the part of the brain where all the emotions are regulated, and this part of the brain is much more primitive than the cortex. Cortex was developed much later than the limbic system. So limbic system is the more primitive part of the brain as compared to any other part. Okay, so now when anybody, like any person, when experiencing some kind of anger or conflict, that person is not able to use the cortical region, the cortex region, because the cortex region is associated with your judgment and logic. Right. So when somebody is experiencing some conflict situation or anger situation, so this part of the brain is not able to function. Rather, the another part which is known as limbic system will take over the function of cortex. So that is why during the conflict situation and anger situation, we are not able to decide, we are not able to take proper decisions, because our limbic system takes over the function of cortical region, which is for the judgment and thinking. Now, the brain responds to the conflict. How brain responds to the conflicting situations. So as I had already discussed, the limbic system is called as the emotional brain. Now, this limbic system has different parts. It also consists of many parts. Like one of the important part is known as amygdala. Like we can see here, amygdala is a very small portion. It is the size of an almond. So amygdala is a very important part of the limbic system, which is the emotional brain. So this amygdala is stimulated in the situation of conflict or anger. So now this amygdala, this portion which is known as amygdala, is mainly responsible for the emotional memories. And this is also considered as the area which is responsible for fight, flight, or freezing condition. Like in case of some survival instincts, we fight or flight, or we just freeze, right? So this is the area which controls these responses. Now the data which we receive from the external environment, which is the world around us, it stimulates the amygdala, which is the part of the limbic system. And this amygdala makes the decision whether the signal is to be sent to the limbic system or the signal is to be sent to the prefrontal cortex. Now, this is the dilemma situation. This is the situation when the conflict happens, because when we perceive something from the environment, from the external environment, so the brain is not able to decide if there is a conflicting situation, and there is a shuttling of the information between amygdala and the prefrontal cortex, because prefrontal cortex is involved in the judgment and the thinking, logical thinking. Amygdala is taking the emotional decisions. So there is a continuous shuttling of the information between these two organs. But depending upon the external information, the intensity of the external information, if the information from outside is able to trigger the enough of emotional charge, so in that case, what happens? Amygdala can override the cortex, right? This is very important. Amygdala can override the function of the cortex, and in that case, prefrontal cortex will not be able to take the logical decision. So in that case, when the person is experiencing some conflict or anger situation, so in that case, the person is not able to decide. The limbic system will come into play, and the lower part of the brain will be more active as compared to the logical part of the brain, which is prefrontal cortex. So during this is a very important event. This is usually called as amygdala hijacking, because during this situation, when the person is experiencing conflict or anger situation, amygdala hijacks the part of the cortex, which is known as prefrontal cortex. So prefrontal cortex is hijacked by the amygdala, and amygdala will take over the function, and it will take the emotional decision, which person may or may not regret in later stages. Now, so very first response which amygdala experiences is the activation of amygdala. So very first reaction will be the activation of amygdala in response to the conflict or the anger situation. As I already discussed, this is the most primitive part of the brain. So stimulation of this part of the brain is unavoidable, because it is the most primitive part. It has been evolved over a period of time from during the evolution. So it is unavoidable to activate, to stop the activation of this part. So very first will be the activation of amygdala. Second will be amygdala will release the signals and stimulate the hypothalamus. Now, hypothalamus is also an important part of limbic system, because now in this situation, we are talking about the limbic system, which is the emotional brain. So many parts of the emotional brain will be activated during the conflicting situation. So second will be the stimulation of hypothalamus. Third will be hypothalamus will stimulate the pituitary gland, which stimulates the adrenal glands, which are located over the kidneys, and they will release the hormone which is known as Adrenocorticotropic Hormone. So this is a basically hormone which is known as a stress hormone. So now we can see how this stress hormone is related by a sequential events. First, amygdala was activated. It activated the hypothalamus sequentially, and then hypothalamus stimulated pituitary gland, which released adrenocorticotropic hormone from the adrenal glands. So now there are multiple hormones like adrenaline, cortisol, and noradrenaline are released during the stress condition, during the anger or conflicting situations. So the flood of hormones which is released during this conflicting situation will create a physical and emotional alarm, right? So this emotional impact may last for several minutes, right? For some time, for few minutes, the person will remain in that angry situation. And during that situation, if the person is taken over by, if the person's behavior is taken over by the amygdala, the person may take some wrong decision, which he or she may regret later when the thinking part of the brain re-engages. So this thinking part of the brain, which we refer to the prefrontal cortex, because it takes time to come out of the situation. So during that time, when the prefrontal cortex is not activated, amygdala will take over the function and person may take some wrong decisions. So this is how the conflicting situation respond to the brain. Now, on an average, it takes 20 minutes for a person to experience the angry state and come back to the normal state where the thinking resumes. Right, so 20 minutes, the person may remain in that state where he or she can take some wrong decisions depending upon how the amygdala behaves. Now, the possible outcomes of anger and conflict. The second hormonal response is the adrenocortical arousal, whose impact can last for hours and even the days. Now, the first one was, as I discussed, was your adrenaline. The second one is the adrenocortical arousal. Now, this hormonal response may even last for hours and days. This is the reason why sometimes we seem to, we see people like they seem to calm down, but usually after some time their anger resumes, right? So because of this hormone, sometimes they seem to calm down, but later on, after a few hours or maybe even a day or two, their anger resumes. So this is a kind of a disproportionate situation, which is because of the hormonal release from the amygdala. Now, these hormones may notice some physical changes. Because of these hormones, there are a lot of physical changes which happen in the body, like increase of heart rate, increase of breathing rate, increasing of blood sugar, perspiration. So these are the main important physical changes which happen during the anger or conflicting situation. Now, this prefrontal cortex and hippocampus, these are the two major important regions of the brain which are affected during the anger situation. So as I already discussed in my previous slide, the prefrontal cortex is mainly deactivated because the amygdala is taking over the function of this region. Secondly, hippocampus is also a very important organ which is also affected during the anger or conflicting situation. And as we all know, hippocampus is the very important part of the brain which is associated with memory and learning, right? So because hippocampus is associated with our declarative memory. So declarative memory means counting the numbers, like recalling the numbers or events or facts. So in this case, if there is a recurrent anger or recurrent conflicting situation, the person may affect the hippocampus may be affected and its size may be decreased due to recurrent conflicting situation. The suppression of hippocampus may interfere with the short-term memory. Now, the stress hormone, mainly the cortisol, is the culprit here. As I already discussed, cortisol is the stress hormone. So this is the culprit. Basically, this hormone brings a lot of physical changes, and it also reduces the serotonin levels. Serotonin is a very well-known hormone. It is for the mood alteration. This is a hormone which brings the happiness, which brings the mood stability. So when this hormone is altered due to the release of cortisol, the person feels very sad or depressive. Now, this is a very good picture which shows how the brain, different part of the brain reacts during the conflicting situation. So as I already discussed, the prefrontal cortex is deactivated by the amygdala. Amygdala is the emotional brain. So emotional brain will take over the function of prefrontal cortex, and this amygdala will bring a lot of physical changes like redness of cheeks, your teeth grinding, clenching of your fist, and redness of eye. So these are the different physical changes which will happen during the anger situation, right? So now the question arises, why only amygdala? Why only amygdala is only activated? So as I already discussed, this area of the brain, this region of the brain is very primitive area which have been evolved over a long period of time. And this has, due to the long practice, it has perfected over the time. So because of its primitive nature, this we cannot avoid of activation of amygdala. Even any person, if comes to this comes to the conflicting or anger situation, amygdala has to activate, because this is the most primitive part of the brain. So but we can avoid the behavioral response. Behavioral response can be avoided, activation cannot be avoided. So it's very simple, like if we had the ability to control the emotion, then there would not be any need of artificial stimulation like roller coasters, sports, movies, recreational drugs. So controlling the emotion is not in our hand. Emotions cannot be controlled, like amygdala activation cannot be controlled. Only the behavioral reaction can be controlled to those emotions, right? So these are unavoidable events which cannot be controlled. While we cannot instantly control our emotions, we can control our behavioral reactions. So to bring the peace and equanimity, we can control the behavioral reactions to the emotions, because the monitoring of behavior is seated in the prefrontal cortex. This is very important because the prefrontal cortex is involved in the logical and the judgmental thinking. So since this is a conscious region, this can be controlled. Behavioral reaction can be controlled, whereas the amygdala response cannot be controlled, right? So yeah, the prefrontal cortex for all its complex nature is not always right. It's not like that prefrontal cortex is always right. It's not like that. It considers many other areas of brain, and it brings the information from different areas of brain and brings the understanding about the situation. Now, as we all know that two different people, if they are exposed to same situation, they will bring in different material, so their understanding may conflict even in the same situation, even as each is sure that they have rationally arrived at the correct understanding. Because as I already discussed, the controlling of behavior for the emotions is important, right? So it may be possible that one person is able to control the behavior in response to the emotion, whereas another person is not able to control, and the amygdala is taking over the function of prefrontal cortex in that person. So one person may conflict with the other with another person about the understanding of the external environment. Okay, so yeah, yes, this is a very good example. I would like to explain you. I came across while reading some article. So there was a hockey match going on. During this hockey match, one child was hit by another child on the back of his head, and the child who was hit, his mother got very much annoyed, because the child who hit the ball to the another child, his mom kind of bullied the another child's mother who was hit by the hockey ball. So what happened? The child's mother, the mother whose child was hit by the ball, her amygdala was activated immediately because she was annoyed, right? Because when she was annoyed, so her amygdala, which is the emotional brain, got immediately activated, and she got the message that it is a threatening situation and I have to do something, I have to fight with the situation. But at the same time, the prefrontal cortex is also activated. Now see, this is a very interesting situation, because now there is a conflict between prefrontal cortex and amygdala. There is a shuttling of information between going on. Now the brain has to take the decision. Now this amygdala will stimulate the sympathetic nervous system, which I already discussed, that amygdala will release the adrenaline. There will be an adrenaline rush in the body, and the adrenaline will make the person more and more angry. But at the same time, prefrontal cortex is also activated. It is thinking about the possible consequences which may happen after the fighting. Now, during this situation, there is one region which is known as insula. Insula is also a part of limbic system, which is the emotional brain. This insula becomes aware that the person is angry and I have to start a fight, right? So at the same time, anterior cingulate cortex gets the dilemma that what should I do? Should I fight or should I stop it? Should I calm down or should I stop it? So now the prefrontal cortex is also thinking about the regretting situation. Now there is a conflict going on. So at this point of time, if the person tries to control the behavior in response to these emotions, that person can calm down, and it can that he or she may focus on taking the deep breath, or there are multiple other techniques like counting, reverse counting, and all, so many things. So he or she can avoid the situation. But if the prefrontal cortex is not activated by our behavioral responses, in that case, amygdala will take over the function, and there will be a fight and big argument. So this is how shows this shows how amygdala and prefrontal cortex, the informations keep shuttling between these two organs. So it depends on us how we know our brain and how we take the decision and resolve the situation. Okay, so why do we care about brain? So as we know, the external environment influences our brain, and how the environment influences, depending upon that, our brain works. So if we have the correct knowledge of our brain function and how these emotions arise, so by having the correct knowledge, we can interact with our environment and in turn can control the behavioral reaction. So this is very important. So knowing your brain, having the correct knowledge of neuroscience, your own brain structure and their anatomy and their functions is very important in resolving any conflicting situation. So there is a very famous neuroscientist and a psychologist also, Rick Hanson. He has written a book which is known as Neurodharma, which is with the name Neurodharma. He studies the mental resources that promote the resilience from the calm and gratitude to confidence and courage. So he talks about how important it is to nurture our social and emotional strength, mainly during the coronavirus crisis. So he talks, it's a recent book, so he talks about the coronavirus situation, and he tells that how important it is to nurture our social and emotional strength. Now, in this book, he talks about cultivating more equanimity, wisdom, moral action, using meditation and other practices. He also talks about the positive states of being, and which can lead to a physical change in brain. Very important, because now, as we all know, brain is no more a rigid part of the body. It is neuroplastic. We talk about neuroplasticity. So neuroplasticity means by certain practices like meditation or some other positive practices, we can change the structure of the brain, not to a larger extent, but at least we can make some new neural connections which will help in improving our state of mind. So this is very important. He talks about the physical changes in the brain by having some good practices. So there are 7 important qualities for the resilient well-being. First one is to steady your mind so that you are mindful, focused, stable, and on a solid footing. Second one is to warm the heart, bring compassion, kindness, and a courageous heart into your life. Third one, to rest in fullness, very important. Fullness is like, it refers to equanimity. You should have a sense of calm, strength, and having enough already. So that creates a fullness feeling. To feel whole and not at war with parts of yourself. Next is to receive nowness. So live in present. Don't get lost in past or future, right? So to open into allness, we are connected to everything. We should remember that like we talk about Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, the whole world is a family. So we should think about allness. Now the last one is very important, the finding timelessness, which speaks to the ultimate ground of well-being. Even the Lord Buddha pointed towards what is unconditioned, not subject to arising and passing away, and therefore a more reliable basis for lasting happiness and inner peace. Okay, so yeah. So now there are some techniques which can disengage amygdala and re-engage the prefrontal cortex. Now this is what we need to do. This is what we need to do during the conflicting situation. Because when there is a conflict going on between amygdala and prefrontal cortex, somehow we have to disengage our emotional brain and re-engage our judgmental brain, which is the prefrontal cortex. So by different means we can do so, by having a breath. It increases the oxygen flow, by writing on a paper, getting curious what is going on in your surrounding, like you're on the street, what is happening. So the curiosity is a function of the prefrontal cortex. So if you bring some curiosity about something, it will disengage the amygdala and activates the prefrontal cortex. You can label the feelings. If somebody has given you something, whatever you have gained, you can label it by some kind of I mean the feeling. Thinking positively, this is also very important. This creates a disruption for the amygdala. If you think positively, amygdala will be disrupted and prefrontal cortex remains activated, and it helps us to take better decisions. Changing locations, removing oneself from the situation that is causing the amygdala to become activated, allows the brain the space to process what has occurred and to apply cognitive thinking to the situation that may help the individual to reframe the situation. This is very important, right? So lastly, I would just say, this is the last, I would like to say that knowledge is the key to change. In order to change, in order to bring changes in our behavior, we must understand the concept of brain, the anatomy and its functioning of the brain, right? So by having the knowledge, correct knowledge of neuroscience, we can bring equanimity and peace. The strategies are like creating changes within oneself, learning to cultivate empathy, learning and implementing conflict resolution techniques. Yeah, so that's all. So with this, I will stop sharing. Yeah.
Right, well, thank you so much, Kanu. That was a little masterpiece.
Thank you.
Your slides are so good. I think all of us are, very grateful. And we're recording this, so we'll be able to share those slides with everybody. I'm sure some people have some questions following that. Who would like to ask a question first? Helena, you
hello, Dr. Thomas Daffern. Yes, I am. Are you able to hear me? Are you able to hear me now?
Okay. I can hear you fine. Yeah.
Okay. So let the questions for this presenter be completed, and then you can invite me to speak.
I will do so. Thank you, sir. Yes. Okay, so let me make a comment, Kanu. It's sort of a question comment, because we've discussed this. And your colleague, Dr. Aaron Sikawa, who's also a neuroscientist, he's been involved in thinking this through. I proposed to Aaron, after an earlier presentation he did a few months ago, which was very impressive, that in the field of conflict resolution studies, which I've worked in for many years, there's not enough knowledge about neuroscience. Not many people know the details of what you've just shared with us, right? And I'm not sure that at the level of international diplomacy, which, for instance, our friend Helena is now training in, I think there's an absence of knowledge about this. And diplomats and politicians who are supposed to be able to make peace, let's say with the Kashmir situation, there's Chinese, politicians, there's Indian politicians deciding what to do. And then there's troops on the ground that are having little conflicts. And obviously their amygdalas are going crazy. They're being shot at. And this is happening in many conflicts. Palestine, Israel, people are being shot all the time. In Armenia and Azerbaijan, there was a full-scale war where if your house is being bombed, your amygdala, like your emotions,
absolutely, yeah,
utterly, so, and you can see the women are all, crying, and the children and all that. So how can we, my question really is, I'd love to work with you and Aaron and others to publish a little sort of manual, yes, handbook for diplomats. True. So that they have this knowledge, you can present it. You see, I think that if diplomats, mediators, were taught this, and then they worked on their own consciousness before they go into their meetings, because often diplomats come and they just argue and shout at each other.
Absolutely, yeah.
So I think this is really precious knowledge you've shared with us. Do you know of anyone who's trying to engage with the diplomatic community? They're supposed to be the peacemakers, but yes, I don't know. I mean, for instance, have you been approached by the Indian government to train the Indian Foreign Office diplomats?
As of now, no. Yeah. Might be Dr. Arun, maybe he'll be able to connect us with some such people like that.
Well, I think there are, you know, there are channels we can pursue if we get the research done, and if we can present it in a way that gives tools to peacemakers how to become peaceful themselves.
Right.
You know, so it's a hugely important topic. Helena, do you want to comment on the on what you heard? You only came in at the end, but you'll be able to hear the rest on the recording.
Yeah, I'm very sorry I missed the start, but it was so interesting what I heard towards the end. And I'm doing a master's degree in international affairs and diplomacy at UNITAR right now. And I'm writing a master thesis about meditation, its role in building peace, prevention of conflict, and supporting mediation.
Oh.
So I really appreciate your information, and I would like to keep in contact with you and hopefully learn some more from you. Thank you very much.
Well, it's totally relevant, isn't it? Helena's someone who's spent many years deeply doing meditation in temples and so on around Asia, and now is going into working with professional diplomats and mediators. So this is exactly the cross connection that we should be making here. Okay, anyone else want to comment about this presentation? Bharti, it's quite similar to some of the work you do, isn't it?
Yeah, it was really very good information. I'm also from science background, science. I could understand all these things very clear. But just a small question, because I am also working on this parenting, and I just believe that everything begins with the child from the when the child is in the womb of mother, right? So I just have a small question, like during childbirth, which part of the brain develops very fast? Do you have an idea? Like
so basically hippocampus and amygdala, both the emotional brain and this the brain which is responsible for your learning and memory. So these are the brain regions. Yeah, there can be more. I can just go through it because I haven't go through that portion. So
are you saying
okay,
that when the child is growing in the womb, those are the parts of the brain that first develop?
Otherwise, information is very good, really, and definitely it will work out for we all meditators like Helena and me, and it will help us, the peace builders.
Yeah,
how we can,
because most important is first we should know the structure, structure and the function, how it works, then only we can work on it.
Stimulation, it goes, and how we can control the hormones.
Absolutely, yes.
Like my therapy also works on the pituitary gland. Like if you hit the pituitary gland, you can control everything. So my therapy is totally on that. So the information is really very good. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Stay connected. Yeah.
Okay. Well, look, let's move on. We can have, Sean, you have a question for us.
Oh, yes. Yeah, thanks very much. That was really informative. Just one question about, is there a difference between hot anger and cold anger, where you're coldly calculating to do something very violent, and the hot anger that you're talking about, the spark of anger, which most people can understand if someone kind of blows up your house and things like that? That's just my question. Where does that into your analysis from the neuroscientific?
Yeah, absolutely. So it only depends upon the how much what intensity your hormone is released. So it's all about your adrenaline, cortisol. So depending upon the how much your hormone is, how your amygdala is activated. Definitely, when you are in conflicted situation, first of all your amygdala will be activated and your prefrontal will be deactivated. It will be disengaged. So depending upon when your amygdala is activated and how much intensity, in what amount your adrenaline is released, cortisol is released, depending upon that, it can be your cold anger or it can be your hot anger. But during that situation, if you are able to disengage your amygdala, it will shift your attention whole to your prefrontal cortex, which will take the judgmental thinking. So depending upon that only, it can be your intensive or it can be less intensive.
Okay, and my final comment, my final sort of suggestion or observation is what would be lovely in a second presentation, like the second part of this, would be to see the physical effects on the brain of advanced meditation techniques,
Yes.
of prayer. And then I know that many neuroscientists have studied, they've worked with yogis and meditators and Buddhists and Jains, but it would be lovely to know that in detail. How exactly are they able to, to interrupt this amygdala kind of reaction? I mean, someone like Thich Nhat Hanh, a great Buddhist here in France, he was describing how he was living in Vietnam and bombs were falling, there were bombs everywhere. And he and his Buddhist monks were all meditating in the temples. And after a while, they realized they ought to take their meditational serenity out into the villages, not just hide away in the temples, but mingle with society to spread that energy of equanimity and so on. And that's what he meant by, he called it engaged Buddhism. It's not Buddhism that hides away in a temple and you look for enlightenment for yourself. You engage with society and you work with everybody to spread that peace. But the physiology of that, the neurophysiology of how those meditational experts can, I mean, is it possible? I mean, for instance, in some mystical traditions like Sufism, a spiritual sage, a Sufi, can transmit grace, baraka, to someone who's very upset. They may be crying, angry. Just one touch of a master can calm them. And they can surrender. And there's many stories of Zen Buddhist monks able to stop robbers just by a look or one touch. I wonder if there's something physiological going on in that. If you've, and how that works scientifically. Those are some new things to think about, maybe.
Sure. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, next, if the extension of this would be how the meditation changes the structural and the functioning of the brain, the neuroanatomy and the functioning as well. Yeah.
I mean, just to be take it up a notch. I mean, what is enlightenment physiologically? Can we measure enlightenment in the brain? I mean, I don't know how many really, really enlightened people there are on the planet now. I don't know, 10,000, 100,000. What's different about their brains and how do they do it? If you can find that secret, we'll give you you'll win the prize. Anyway, we'll keep asking, all right? Thank you so much, Kanu. That was brilliant.